Good morning all and welcome. We are delighted that you could join us here this morning for our session where we will explore the emerging role of online food retail systems for sustainability. And by sustainability, we are interested in the context of the household and the individual rather than sustainability within the supply chain or sustainability of the actual system itself. Prior to going into the workshop as a whole, we would just like to briefly draw attention to a few housekeeping points. During the team live event, all attendees' microphones will be on mute and your cameras will not be transmitting. We would invite you to interact with us via the question and answer box on the right hand side of your screen. And we would also ask you to actually vote for questions that you're interested in the answers of, rather than having multiple or duplicate questions emerging in that Q&A system. The event will be recorded and the recordings will be later posted on both the CUBS website and the ERI website for further viewing. I suppose when we look at consumer behaviour and consumer demand, we recognise in the food domain that convenience, value and enjoyment present as fundamental characteristics, and if they are absent in products, they will not probably be considered in the long term by consumers. Differentiation comes from things such as health, ethical, animal welfare, transparency, social connection, etc. And it is within that domain, I suppose, that we can start to think about issues around time pressure and the addition of time pressures as a barrier to purchasing particular products. Within that context, socio-technical platforms offer opportunity to unlock offer means to unlock opportunities for food suppliers and add significant value for consumers. Within the digital selling platforms, consumers can explore more food alternatives, learn more about suppliers and support local producers, to name but a few. Consequently, it is unsurprising that these alternatives are coming to the attention of consumers in greater and greater levels over the last number of years. Today, we will consider the benefits and values gained by consumers through the use of these alternative food acquisition routes and what motivates the use of the online interface and where sustainability lies within that. COVID-19 has accelerated the process of engagement. Indeed, McKinsey highlights that 10 years worth of adoption occurred in the first 8 weeks of lockdown. So we can see that more and more people are interested in this as a means of addressing time pressures and adding value to them. As we also witness that this is an opportunity for small businesses, particularly, to engage more directly with their consumers. So I'm delighted today that we have presenters who will provide us with insights into what consumers are thinking and what platforms consumers are using. We will start first with Dr. Shadi Hazim, who will give us a little bit of insight on online food provisioning systems and how they have changed pre and post March 2020. And from there we will have 3 panelists, one from Musgraves, one from Neighbour Food and one from UCC, who will speak to the consumer insights that they have gained through their experiences. In light of time constraints, I'm now going to invite Dr. Shadi Hazim, who is the postdoctoral researcher on our EU Horizon 2020 AirNet SUSFood 2 co-fund project, funded by the EU in collaboration with the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine Firm Initiative, and we thank them for that funding. And he will speak on the online food provisioning systems very briefly. Shadi, I will turn over to you at this point and thank you.
Thanks, Mary, and good morning, everyone. We have done mapping of the online food provisioning systems in Ireland in order to build a profile of their organizational structure and some online business features. So the mapping work was done in 2 phases. The first and main phase was started in 2018 and until early 2019, and the second phase started in 2020 following the increasing popularity of digital food services following the lockdown restrictions due to the outbreak of COVID-19. Work. So from until the time of the audit in July 2020, we have identified a total of 328 online food provisioning systems. And using a web server archive, we were able to obtain the year foundation of the online food provisioning systems websites. And you see here in this graph is the number of online food provisioning systems in the past 20 years from 1998 until 2020. And you can see that the number of online food provisioning systems were increasing steadily over time. And in 2020, we have recorded the highest number of online food provisioning systems in one single year compared to the past 20 years, with 41% increase, which is like 4 or 5 times higher than the highest number of OFPS found between 1998 and 2019, especially in the years 2007, 2013, and 2017. So from the total number of OFPS found, we have identified 4 different models, such as mass retail, independent food shops, such as butchers, online fishmongers, and other local suppliers, online-only food suppliers, and alternative food networks. Overall, independent food shops are the most prevalent, followed by online-only food suppliers and alternative food networks. Mass retailers were the lowest to provide online services. Only 2 mass retailers, SuperValu and Tesco, were providing online services in Ireland. And if we break the data into pre and post March 2020, we will see that from the additional 96 OFPS identified in 2020, online food services were the most prevalent, with 45%. This reports to a 57% increase in the total of online food suppliers compared to the total online food suppliers that was found between 1998 and 2019. Alternative food networks were the second, with 45% increase, and finally independent food shops with 29% increase. And while there was no change, or there was no increase in the mass retail offering online service in 2020, we noted that some online or some mass retailers were offering online service through a third-party food platforms, such as Donza stores in Dublin were offering online service through Buy Me platform, joining the German discount retailer Lidl, who also don't have online service but offer online through the a third-party online platform. So regarding the product origin, which refers to the place of production of products offered online, we can see here that alternative food networks was the highest in offering an online service with 84%. They specialize in local, and this makes sense because of the farm to fork and short supply chain structure that characterize these networks. Comes second, online only, with 42%, and finally independent food shops with 38% to offer and specialize in local products. Regarding the value propositions, these are values and ethos communicated by the OFPS in Ireland, and we have identified some values that correspond to United Nations SDGs. And you can see here in the boxes that health and well-being and environmental protection were the most common values to be communicated online, with online-only services and alternative food networks were highest in communicating values regarding health and well-being. Alternative food networks were the highest in communicating values regarding environmental protection, while food waste was the lowest value to be communicated across all types of OFPS, and we will see later with Dr. Claire how important this value in influencing household food consumption practices. So the main takeaway messages is that one has seen digitalization growing significantly in 2020, with evidence of increasing popularity of digital food acquisition and digital food services following the lockdown and COVID-19 pandemic. Second, digitalization may provide an opportunity to preserve local food and farming by providing a much needed online market space for these local businesses to present their products and hopefully sustain their business by directly promoting and selling their products to consumers. As we also noted that, I mean, the question remains open over their ability to sustain their business online, as we noted that some businesses went back offline after easing the lockdown restrictions in the past few months. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Shadi. If you want further information on that, Shadi will of course be delighted to speak to you with regard to this. And we should note, of course, there are screening criteria associated with who the types of organisations that were included in this audit, which excluded takeaway, delivery services, etc., because otherwise the number would have been much greater. I think the point, I suppose, that particularly Shadi was making here was the increasing level of alternative food networks and primary producers that started to use this online service at the start of the pandemic, but equally important, the number that were using it and looking at it as a means to reaching markets prior to that. Now, we will move directly on to our panellists, and what we have is an opportunity to hear from, firstly, Niamh O'Mahony from Musgraves, and Niamh is the Digital Operations Manager for SuperValu Online Shopping, and having joined Musgraves in July 2019, Niamh has worked in the digital sphere since leaving university and e-commerce specifically over the past 10 years. She joined Musgraves in 2019 and she, I suppose, is going to tell us a little bit about SuperValu's and Musgraves' experience with online pre and during COVID, and particularly the role of sustainability within that. Niamh, thank you very much for joining us today, and we're going to ask Niamh to do a brief introduction followed by me posing a few questions to her in this space. Thank you, Niamh.
Great, thanks very much, Mary. It's great to have an opportunity to speak about what we're doing with SuperValu online shopping. So I suppose, as mentioned, I came into the business last summer, but the service itself has been available to customers for quite some time. And as mentioned by Shadi, SuperValu was, until pre-COVID, was one of two main retailers that offered an online service. SuperValu is quite unique though, in that we offer the service via our independent retailers across the country, and that was one thing that really helped us during COVID. I suppose your local SuperValu is actually not too far from you, unless you're on one of the West Cork Islands or somewhere like that. And we actually, I suppose, in a way, the website is actually 135 different stores. So we have unique stores for each one of those local stores that has an online service. The service was definitely growing at a pace that we were quite happy with. And then March happened, when suddenly, as was mentioned in the introduction, 10 years of technology, embracing of technology was done overnight, and we saw a complete sea change. We saw a 400% increase in the demand for the service overnight, for example, and each time that there was an official announcement, you could watch the stats on the website and you could see another surge for demand. And I suppose it was a hugely challenging time for everybody involved, but what we did and insisted on doing was just focusing on the customer experience, and that's where it goes back to. So the idea of e-commerce and purchasing items online, it's not a new idea, but everybody loves food, and particularly in Ireland we're all passionate about it. And myself and my team, if you can start talking about your job and mentioning the little facts that you were doing today, and you're talking about food, you can see everybody switch on, because everyone has to buy food, everyone cooks food, everyone hopefully enjoys food. And we have to feed into that sort of element of the food process. And we do believe we can offer a very good service for people. Some things that are really important: convenience, you've already mentioned. You can do your shopping while you're sitting in the car waiting to pick someone up from training. You can do it on your commute into the office. These are the sort of things we talk about. It saves you time, it's convenient, you get it at a time that suits you. But behind that, there is an awful lot of organisation, and there is a massive logistical, I suppose, operation in managing what is essentially an online order down to your local store, and then having your local staff that you know picking that for you and getting it to your home. One thing that we've seen on the sustainability side as well is a growing interest in the click and collect service, which is where you actually order online and have people, you roll up to your local store, buzz a buzzer or call the store, and your shopping gets dropped out to the boot. And these are the sort of things that we're seeing. In terms of sustainability, we see that coming through very much from our shoppers. The message is that this is important to them. And what's really interesting, I suppose, is it's the pester power. So we see that mums are the key shoppers in life, but they are being influenced by their extended family, their kids, the teenagers. I think we've never been more aware of the importance of the environment, sustainability issues, making an effort in terms of carbon reduction, in terms of packaging, and these are all priorities for the SuperValu business. There's currently a strategy that's there from running up to 2025 with a lot of quite ambitious targets, but the business itself sees this as a priority. It sees its retailers as being leaders in this area, but also we know from doing customer research and talking to our shoppers that they're looking to us as retailers and suppliers to actually help find the solutions in this regard, which is really interesting. One of the key things in online shopping is trust. And that's trust in that you're going to get your order on time and as you ordered it, but also that whoever is picking your online shop for you is going to take the time to pick exactly what you need and as you asked, and that you get what you paid for at the end of the day. And that is something that we have seen grow during COVID, being quite honest. And at one point, there was a massive emphasis on actually customer service and calling people who perhaps needed to just hear that reassurance during that period where I suppose there was a couple of challenges around availability initially. There were a couple of days when there just wasn't enough capacity to help all of our shoppers when they needed to. And that was exactly the period where online shopping showed its potential and came through to the fact that we always come back to basics. We like to get people into a routine. And that's what we've also seen with online shopping. If we can get established in someone's head, get over the technical challenges that they perceive, it really is something that becomes part of their daily routine, and it becomes the first element in that food experience that they have. So it's how the food gets into their house, but it's also then how they get to choose, it's how they get to browse, it's the choice that they see in store is reflected online. And that's very much where myself and my team work to expand those options and to make sure that our customers essentially have a seamless shopping experience, though they're seeing it from the comfort of their own home.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil, for that very interesting introduction. And it's great to see that trust is an integral part of that and how you build that over time, and also that sustainability is central to what is driving demand, be it in the store or online. I suppose in that sense, the first question that I'd like to ask you is, how does the online shopping team take sustainability into consideration in designing the offering and making that delivery to the customers, particularly given the additional pressures you've experienced with 400% growth in demand overnight?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I suppose there's sustainability comes from two sides. I think as a business, it's the right thing to do, but as a business, we're seeing that that's what our consumers and shoppers want to see as well. So as mentioned, particularly with digital, and you referenced it in my introduction, so I've worked with digital technologies and websites, social media pretty much throughout my whole career. And what I love about it is that there's an immediacy of feedback, and you can actually see the data live. So we've spent an awful lot of time pre-COVID and during COVID touching base with shoppers and actually listening to them and what they want, and doing some deep and meaningful research. And particularly around sustainability, what we found is that kids in particular and teenagers have learned a lot over the years. Through the education system, we've never been more aware around sustainability issues. And this is actually one of the key drivers in the family unit becoming more aware of sustainability issues. What we've also seen is that they look to ourselves as Musgraves, but also our suppliers to see solutions. So what we have been doing, and I think the figure, I have it there somewhere, is we have 25 lines already this year where we've removed all packaging and actually replaced it with reusable, compostable or recyclable packaging. And that's the commitment that Musgrave has given to actually have I suppose compostable, recyclable or reusable packaging on all own brand lines before 2025. And that filters through to online very specifically, because whatever people are looking for in store, they also want to see online. And we are more than ever, I suppose, aware of things like when we have a fleet on the road, zoning it properly, making sure we get, I suppose, the most effective way of getting to certain areas of the city and county, so that you're not going to one area of the city and then going straight across to a different area of the city. There's a very conscious effort. For instance, SuperValue launched an eco-friendly range that's also available online. And as mentioned, the click and collect service that we provide is also something that's growing in popularity. And this is again an easy way for people to pick up their online shopping, but it's ordered through the website and you don't actually interact with the store as such.
Okay, thank you for that. Local products and suppliers are an important piece of the sustainability narrative, I suppose, in many respects. And how do you take that into account in the online system?
I suppose that's our biggest challenge, but also probably one of the most exciting parts of our work currently. I think COVID has changed the view as well slightly. So we very much saw that even though technology is a challenge, and grocery e-commerce is very, very different to, for example, if you have a shoe store with 50 products, it's quite easy to display the breadth of your catalogue. With e-commerce and particularly grocery, we have a huge range that we have to put online, and we have to try and promote all elements of it. And within that, local is extremely important for SuperValue. So when you walk into your local SuperValue store, and the emphasis is always there, it's from your town, it's in your city, it's in your neighbourhood, you will see items that are either made in store from local suppliers in your area, or we have a fantastic Food Academy programme, which was, I suppose, the first of its kind when it initially launched. And it has seen some local suppliers become national suppliers, but each year we see newer and newer local suppliers coming through that range as well. And I think Irish people have a great affinity and grow with local Irish products. And I think what's really interesting actually in the last few years is that they're not necessarily Irish in origin, but they're Irish made and developed in Ireland, and that we're showing a much more multicultural variety of the products that are coming through, and it's fantastic to see. And as an online team, our priority is to ensure all of those local elements reflect online, so that if I log in West Cork, I can actually see the local suppliers available in my local SuperValue. And that's a big challenge, but it's amazing, and it's really, really energizing when you can deliver on it as well.
Okay, thank you. I noticed that there are some questions coming up on our live chat, and some of them we will hold to the end because we're planning on giving 10 minutes there. But there's one, Niamh, that's particularly specific to you, and it relates to your one of your first comments with regard to delivery and zoning, and it's come from Seamus. It says, "Thanks, Niamh, for delivery," and i.e. not click and collect, so there's a little bit of humour there. Is fulfilment from the store or Musgrave's warehouse? So is it coming from the store directly, or is it coming from the warehouse?
Yeah, that's the very unique thing about the service we offer. It's coming from your local SuperValue. So as I said, if I log in and my local SuperValue, I'll let you in a secret, I'm here in Dublin, but my local SuperValue at home when I'm in Cork would be Ryan's in Glanmire. So when I put in an order, I choose my store, I know I will view their range, I will see all their local lines, and it will be delivered from Ryan's in Glanmire. And that is, I suppose, brilliant, because we know it's sustainable and it's local, and you're getting Jim down the road is delivering and he knows where your house is. But the flip side is the logistics behind it and the support behind it is another level of challenge. But I think it's how the business, it's its USP, it's its unique selling point, and it's how we can retain a really strong focus on local without, I suppose, even trying. It's not an effort, it's who we are.
I suppose it also has the added advantage that you have a fair idea of the person that's making your filling your basket for you.
Absolutely, it always helps, and it's amazing the notes that we get in. Will you ask Mary to make sure to put my paper in this? You know, you're like, yeah, no problem.
So it's making the experience more trusting and more authentic. One final very brief question for you before we move on to Jack, and that is, how has COVID-19 changed your service? You did mention that you had to really accelerate up your service. But what else has changed?
I suppose, I think if we had to put a single figure on it, it's who, I suppose it's quite a challenge it's quite a different thing to order your groceries online. It's more complex than just buying a single pair of shoes. And that has always been a challenge for us, to get people through that journey and to stick with it. COVID meant that people had to. That for very basic reasons, technology reasons, they got over their fear, and we've seen a significant change in the age demographic of people using the service, for instance. We've also seen people who are occasional shoppers become regular shoppers, and like everything in life, routine is key, and we've always been, I suppose, trying to establish and support that routine by keeping people shopping regularly. But it's also shown us that we have to be adaptable, and that we need to keep listening to customers and shoppers about what they want, because even though it's different from in store, we don't interact directly with customers. If we forget about our customers, we'll lose the essence of the service. So we have to put our customers first, and when that's a digital service that we're providing, it means a concerted effort to keep that shopper feedback and that interaction and that sort of insight from shoppers to the fore of everything we do.
Niamh, I have one very, very, very final quick question at this point. Based on the fact that a number of your customers have moved from in-store to online, and you have loyalty information, have you looked at, or have you considered whether your customers are spending more, less, or the same, or is it something that you're going to be exploring? So in other words, the quantities of products and what they're spending their monies on.
Yeah, so we tend to see bigger shops online, because I think people want to get as much value out of the shop as possible. So they'll get all their big toilet rolls, the big bulky stuff, as well as the regular shop. So we definitely see bigger shops online and less of that money popping in for milk.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Niamh. We'll come back to you for a brief panel discussion at the end. Now, I'd like to turn to Jack Crotty. And Jack began his career in food with jobs throughout college, working in restaurants. Quickly, he realised it was for him and started a path that led him to Ballymaloe Cookery School and ultimately the setting up of the Rocket Man, a plant-focused street food company. In time, it would come clear to Jack that small independent producers were being bypassed by larger retailers in advancing with public trends. Neighbour Food was built as a model to pool small food producers together and create streamlined shopping experiences for customers. Neighbour Food is now successfully operating both in Ireland and the UK, with 58 markets open at this point and many more in development. Jack, thank you very much for joining us here this morning, and I will hand over to you at this point. Jack, I think you're muted.
No, I think I'm unmuted.
Yeah,
can everybody hear me?
Now, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a really interesting panel discussion. It's one that I would certainly be tuning in and listening to had I not been asked to be part of it. It's questions that we keep coming back to ourselves. The title, when you asked me what I wanted or thought I should speak about in this instance, was, are we buying local, and if not, why? And it's an interesting question because it's one that would have been the basis for foundation when we conceived Neighbour Food and we put all the time into building it and putting it together. But it's also the same question that we try and come back to every day when we consider what to do next. Is everyone wants to shop more locally, but yet they're not. There are barriers there, and many of those barriers are quite easily overcome, and that's what we're trying to achieve to do with Neighbour Food. I think the easiest thing to do might be to play this video, because I think it better explains Neighbour Food than me rambling onto a microphone.
Hi, I'm Simone. I'm from Neighbour Food, an online shopping platform where consumers can buy directly from producers. What happens here is the producer comes and fills the basket, and the producers are gone off site, and then the consumer comes. So this all happens within a 2-hour period, and the consumer comes and can collect contactless their basket of shopping. So they have bought it online by credit card, so there's no money changing hands. Social distancing is applied, and for those that are compromised and stuck at home, we can come and we can actually deliver contactless to them. So it means that people who are in need of good nutrition can get it directly to their door, and there's no queuing. It's totally safe.
Hi, my name is Heather and I'm a volunteer here at Neighbour Food. This week we're doing deliveries. It's my little contribution. Thankfully I'm well and I'm fit and able to go out and do it. It's a great service that's there for people who don't maybe have the option, so it's a brilliant thing to volunteer and do. So the whole idea is that we give you a call when we're outside the door, we drop the food outside, you open your front door, take all the bits in, we take it away, then afterwards when you're back inside. There is no contact at all.
Hi, I'm Beverly. I'm a long-term customer of Neighbour Food. I've been using it since the start. Absolutely fantastic. I love it because of the fact that we're supporting local producers, but also the fact that it's actually made me very disciplined in terms of shopping. And I find since I've started shopping like this, I haven't thrown anything out. There's very, very few things that get thrown out. So it's a very, very sensible way to shop. And it is really cutting down on waste, which is so important in these times. And at the moment, I think it's answering a lot of needs of people who are housebound in the current climate with COVID-19, because we're now able to have less contact with people, still support our local producers, keep social distancing, and hopefully this will end soon, but I won't be ending my contact with Neighbour Food. This will be going on, and I hope a lot of people will have discovered it after that.
Okay, thank you very much, Jack, for that. Do you want to say a few words before I ask you a few questions, or would you like to move directly to questions?
Well, maybe I'll just give one explanation of actually what Neighbour Food is, because it can be difficult to understand. But the simplest way I can explain it is that it's an aggregator model. So we have built a platform that allows local producers to sign up and create shops, and then they can join different collection points within their community, and they can supply their products in. From a customer's point of view, you're shopping from the Neighbour Food Cork City or Neighbour Food Limerick or wherever it is shop, but you could be buying from any number up to, I mean, one of our biggest markets probably has 65 producers joining it. You can shop in one unified experience, you pay in one go, and then the producers each individually drop in. They're organized at the depot, and then you come and collect it all in one basket. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make shopping from local producers as easy and easier than shopping from a larger convenient retailer.
Okay, thank you very much for that explanation. And I suppose in many respects what we're witnessing with Neighbour Food is the real leveraging of socio-technological platforms to enable greater availability of local foods to local communities. I suppose, Jack, you have grown from strength to strength, and the title of your actual presentation was, are we buying local, and if not, why? So I suppose in many respects you have customers and they're the people that are buying in, but do you think more generally food customers are buying locally? And if not, why? And I suppose that brings us to the second question. Was Neighbour Food conceived with this idea of both buying local in mind, or was it broader than that?
Well, very much so. It was conceived from my own experience of being at farmers markets and seeing the popularity of the markets grow, but the stalls selling primary produce either selling less or actually leaving the markets. And when I talk about primary produce, Neighbour Food is built for veg producers, for animal husbandry and meat product producers, dairy, eggs, bread. And the incredible thing is that this is what people are buying on Neighbour Food. We can see it. People are buying, they're cooking, they're sharing recipes. So there are many ways in which food producers can sell their products, and the farmers market is the first step in the ladder. The idea for Neighbour Food was that it was the next step in the ladder. We built it certainly from a producer's point of view. And for many of these smaller scale producers, taking that jump into centralized distribution is just too big. They don't have the land for it, or they don't have the manpower, or they don't have the desire to grow to that level. So the idea for Neighbour Food was add in some other aspects to your business without having to feel pressured with supply and quantity, and put quality first and allow the producers set their own prices. So we don't control the pricing on Neighbour Food, nor do we control the stock or put pressure on anybody to supply. They can join in and out as they have things, which makes it very exciting as a place to shop because it varies for the customers. Some week you have a new farmer coming in with some amazing range of vegetables, and then a month later they're gone, and then another person comes in, which just keeps customers engaged with the natural way in which food is produced and connects them a little bit more with what comes from their communities.
Okay, now I've just gone back to Nia's presentation. She mentioned that strategically SuperValu are looking to reduce packaging. In part of your narrative as you were developing your business model, was packaging a central issue, or how did you develop that to support sustainability within households?
Well, the issue of packaging and reducing the waste of single-use materials is something that's in the mind of many of the small producers before you ever go there. So it's not a conversation that almost we need to have in many cases. Many people arrive with paper bags or biodegradable things. But when we started, the actual attention we were getting, 2018 is when we started, the real excitement we were getting online was how much less waste people have in their recycling bin at the end of the week. So we started kind of investigating this more and saying, what more can we do? And as I mentioned, producers supply Neighbour Food, so we don't control what they do. So I can't put a guarantee and say that Neighbour Food is plastic free because there are some producers that need to use it. But we work through with different people and we change it. And I think in Cork now, for instance, we have probably cut it down by about 80 or even 90%. The majority of the materials that are being used are either biodegradable, in most cases compostable, or in fact reusable. So all of our milk comes in glass bottles, the buttermilk, any of the jars, we take them back. In some cases, we offer a deposit of 50 cents on things so that we can actually keep consumers without having to pay any extra for that service. And because we work with smaller groups, these types of changes that are needed can happen incredibly quickly. You turn around to the farmer and you say, can you not use plastic when you pack your leaves? And they say, well, I can't use brown paper because then the leaves dry out. And we say, well, have you tried these bio bags? They give them a try, they're perfect. Now suddenly that person's plastic free. So it's these types of changes that can be quite dynamic in a system like Neighbour Food. And a lot of our consumers definitely buy into shopping with us weekly for that reason.
That's fantastic. Now, just speaking of your consumer and customer, could you briefly describe the Neighbour Food customer persona? What makes the difference to the mass retailer online customer? What makes them different in your mind?
Well, as we have said, like the homemaker, the mum or the dad who's at home looking after the house or putting together, or maybe the one who's doing the cooking, is generally the one who's doing the shopping. So we do find that there is a pattern of parents, particularly parents of kind of younger children, that tend to be our key customers. But other than that, I wouldn't say that there's a huge amount of pointers into demographic. So we would have many older people. It would surprise you at some of the older people in their 70s and 80s who we teach to use the software once and then try and push it through. And then we would have other cases where we have some college students who use it, but generally our demographic would be between kind of 28 and 65. That would be our usual kind of audience age.
Okay. And you've seen significant growth in demand from a consumer side over the last number of months. How did COVID-19 impact upon the business, or did it impact in any real way for you?
Well, yeah, we probably grew about 1,000% in the space of about 6 weeks. So what was a sustainable business that had growth, not big growth, but a very kind of slow climb up through groups. What really affected us was the closure of farmers markets and restaurants meant food producers had nowhere to supply. And these aren't businesses that can just stop overnight. Cows need to be milked. Pigs need to be fed. Vegetables have already been sown and they need to be picked or else they'll rot. So the types of producers that we work with needed somewhere to sell. So it was the influx of sellers that actually really provided us with the largest growth because we needed places to sell those produce. So we started identifying different regions and opening up these collection points, and the customers followed, which we were very lucky for. But I suppose it was all in relation to everybody just moving online with everything.
So that's fantastic, Jack. Well, hopefully now that I've discussed, we can come back to you with a few more questions. And thank you very much for giving us that brief insight into neighbour food. Now I would like to finally turn to Dr. Claire O'Neill, and Dr. Claire O'Neill is a college lecturer here in UCC in ethics and marketing, and her teaching and research interests are focused on ethical implications of business and marketing decisions on society. She has a particular interest in sustainable consumption and the ways in which our sustainable behaviour patterns are developed. She has also volunteered and mentored students as part of the UCC Green Campus, a third level initiative, and she's the co-PI on the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine co-funded EU Sus Food Platforms project, which is what we are here today on. And we again thank the Department of Agriculture for supporting us on this. And she will now share some insights from the primary work that we have done on this project, where we have explored within the household the types of practices that individuals engage in the household to promote sustainability, and how this applies within an online purchasing model. So Claire, I will hand over to you, where you might give a brief account of some of the top line findings, and we will have, of course, publications and more detailed outputs from that at a later date. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Mary, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. So what I'm going to do, basically, so as Mary has mentioned, this is on the PLATEFORMS project, and the first phase of that project, Shadi already mentioned in terms of the audit that we did of online food suppliers or sellers in Ireland at a particular point in time. And the second phase of that project was looking at more qualitative work and looking at going into households and trying to uncover the behaviours within households. So essentially, we know very little about how online or indeed any food platform or supply chain affects sustainability within the household. And where certain, suppliers are positioned in the market in terms of sustainability, we don't necessarily know a lot about how that affects consumption within the household. So what we did was we went behind closed doors. We went into the kitchens of 40 households across the south and east of the country last winter. Thankfully, it was pre-COVID. And what we were looking at was trying to uncover practices within the kitchen. So practices in the sense of looking at, firstly, their acquisition. So the different ways that people get their food and the different places that they get their food, because I suppose it's fair to say that people don't, for the most part, don't necessarily shop in one particular place, and they use a variety of suppliers. So we looked at that first, looked in terms of acquisition. We then looked and spoke in detail, and these were in-depth ethnographic style interviews. So we did very, very detailed, sort of rich conversations around their food and around the practices that people engage with in their food. So we spoke about cooking and how people cook and the utensils they use. We also used a food diary as a means or as a method to try to gain some insight into the way people consume within the household, and a kitchen walkabout. So the kitchen walkabout involved us while we were in the house, walking around and videoing while the person was speaking us through their kitchen layout and the different things that they did. So that was particularly important in terms of the cooking aspect of consumption and looking at the different materials that play a part when people are engaging in cooking. And we then went to speak about eating and storage, and then finally disposal. And I think it's important here to distinguish between the type of research that we did. We focused specifically on those practices rather than consumption choices. So a lot of the work done to date in this space in terms of food consumption from a sustainability standpoint is at the point of purchase context. It's looking at, do people support local? Do they buy sustainable or ethical products? And when we take this practice-based approach, we're looking at it in a more holistic space, and we're looking at, when we're looking at sustainability in the food supply chain, where obviously the supply and the production and the market of those products is important. It doesn't end there, and particularly in terms of food waste. So that's where, taking it inside people's houses is important in sort of broadening our understanding of what this means from a consumer point of view. The results give us a good sense of how sustainability, or I suppose more generally, how food is consumed within households. And obviously where several have mentioned already in terms of convenience and value and enjoyment are important for consumers, and that won't be jeopardized for the sake of sustainability. What we're seeing in this data set, and it's 40 households, I don't know if I mentioned that, but it's 40 households in total that we looked at. Now we looked at, you know, different ways people get their food, so online just being one. So I'll obviously speak to that today. But, you know, farmers markets and physical stores, you know, mainstream and other independents were also looked at. So the main themes that we're seeing, and I suppose this speaks to Jack's previous point, is, you know, one of the key things is accessibility to local and seasonal produce. That's a key theme coming from specifically in terms of online consumers. Another key theme is food and meal planning. So this is interesting in the sense of food planning, in the sense of that traditional shopping list, and how people are engaging with that type of planning from an online perspective. And then also meal planning and how meal planning is occurring, and that has key implications in terms of sustainability. And then finally, and probably most importantly or most prevalent in all interviews, was waste aversion. So there is a very strong focus on food waste aversion, which, you know, as from a consumer point of view, and as we have seen from Shadi's presentation earlier, from the value propositions marketed by suppliers, food waste is very, very low. So food waste is something that's not necessarily spoke about, yet it is something that's a key issue and a key frustration, I guess, for consumers.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. And I suppose I would just start with a very broad question. From that deep dive into the rich data set, have you a sense of how important sustainability is? You've mentioned that idea of waste aversion and how important it is relative to other food choice motives for those that are actively involved in purchasing online. So we can be adverse to waste, but it doesn't mean that we don't waste, and it does require us to take actions with. So just back over to you on the question.
Absolutely. So I suppose when we think about sustainability, we probably typically think about it in terms of product attributes, but it goes beyond that. And I suppose in terms of, you know, how we use a particular product, that can either be sustainable or not, and that particularly speaks to the waste point. So where in some cases we see a priority and a preference for consumers in terms of supporting something that can be deemed from a product attribute point of view as sustainable, i.e. local, for instance. In other cases, that's not particularly relevant, but we still see evidence of sustainable consumption within the household, or at least trying to engage in practices of sustainable consumption. So I suppose one of the first points there to that is the waste aversion. And you know, consumers are particularly, some are particularly capable of managing waste. So irrespective, I suppose, of where that waste has come from, and we do actually have seen this particularly with people using alternative food networks. So I guess the food may be that little bit more expensive, but there's strategies that people put in place in order to avoid food waste. So if I'm to give one quote, for example, this is someone who was, I guess, looking into their fridge and seeing that they had several different things that they needed to use. So this person said, if I had a load of tomatoes and they were not going to be used, then I'll make a load of tomato sauce and then subsequently freeze that. So the freezer is quite important here, I suppose, in terms of preservation. And she continues, if I know there's too much vegetables there, I'll make soup. Fruit and things like that, there's no problem, just puree it. Puree apples, raspberries, strawberries. So there's sort of, in that sense, from this particular consumer, again, one that uses alternative food networks online, there's competency there in terms of avoiding food waste. But this also links as well in terms of meal planning. So where that person is sort of more just dealing with it and putting it aside for use later. We have examples of where consumers use things that are in their fridge as the main focal point for a meal, because they don't want to waste it. So for instance, another person says, you know, the cauliflower was there, and I'm like, I have got to use the cauliflower. So this consumer then went out and purchased other things to make sure that that cauliflower was used up, and they ended up making cauliflower mash. So and actually went specifically to other places, physical stores, to make sure that they had enough to make up the meal. So here we see where the meal planning and waste diversion is sort of coming together. But one of the key things here, I guess, is recipes. And particularly if people have seasonal produce, there's a very strong emphasis on using recipes when consumers are faced with different seasonal produce. But when it comes to food waste, you know, just another quote again, someone who was struggling and struggles, I guess, with dairy and dairy going out of date. So this person says, I'd be telling the family that there's ghost cheese there, you have to eat it, or else there's ricotta there, we have to find some way of using it ASAP. We just look up recipes, and goes on to say, we discovered that you can do ricotta pancakes, which are divine. So here we actually see it bridging into novel cooking practices and engaging in that cooking space in order to avoid, I suppose, a sustainability issue from a disposal point of view, but actually engaging with it in a cooking space. So waste diversion, like I said, is something that from the consumer's point of view is really important. There's talk about feeling guilty, feeling awful, people saying such a sin to throw out food. And in order to sort of, I guess, you know, dampen down those feelings of guilt, consumers then tend to, and this is sort of more broadly, engage in keeping leftovers. So, you know, the use of leftovers and keeping dinners and putting them in the fridge. And this sort of gets rid of that feelings, you know, those negative emotional feelings. But unfortunately, what we see in some cases where some leftovers are used, not all of them are. And what happens is those leftovers end up thrown out 3 or 4 days later. So we're moving the sort of guilt of the food waste connected to the actual cooking and moving it further down the road, I guess, but not necessarily getting rid of it. And I guess just to mention the other theme that I said was quite important is seasonality. And, you know, this is a very strong theme in terms of people, you know, having access to seasonal produce and access to local foods. And when we see, and there are some differences, I guess, when we look at our 2 previous speakers, there are some differences from our consumers who, you know, did mainly mainstream online shopping, and then those who did, you know, engaged in more alternative food networks like Neighbour Food. And in some cases, when consumers were seeking variety or seeking some sort of you know, just to add a little bit of extra seasonality or local produce to their regular food shop, they would engage in these online spaces. And one example here is, you know, it was a little bit dull, I think, speaking of their diet or their shopping. So I used to look them up. This is in the case of kale and beetroot in specifically, to get the whole organic beetroot. We never got that kind of kale before. And then somebody else saying they have really nice potatoes, and they even have things like nettle leaves, which are unusual. So again, trying to add variety and I suppose a little bit of, you know, a little bit of spice to their diet or to their ingredients that they cook with. But interestingly, and this I suppose specifically speaks to those engaged in box schemes, or again, those sort of alternative food networks, we had one particular example of someone who engaged in the box scheme in order to learn more about local and seasonal. So this particular person said, I suppose, you know, I have a rough idea what is winter and what is spring, what is summer, but I don't know, you know, is it an aspirational thing? Maybe I want to know more. That's why I like the veg box. You know, and this is where she goes on to say that the veg box has allowed them to understand more about food and to learn more. So it's almost like a sort of an educational tool to engage more in seasonal produce and in local produce. But again, one of the key things here, specifically for those, I guess, starting off or that don't have too much knowledge, is the use of recipes to ensure that we don't have food waste.
Okay, Claire, just in relation to that, I mean, you've mentioned this idea of variety and maybe using box schemes. Is there a difference between those that the motivations for shopping and how they shop between, we say, main online versus the alternative network online? And just a very brief answer on that. I mean, how they actually make choices. Like Niamh mentioned earlier that it adds a flexibility that they can actually do their ordering while in the car, or equally they can do it in their kitchens at home.
Yeah, absolutely, Mary. And I think when it comes to the online consumer, they are primarily looking for convenience, and looking to do it that they don't need to take that hour and go into a supermarket, that they can sit down at 7 o'clock in the evening and do their shop. And I think what's key here from a sustainability point of view is that they're able to do this sort of check, click, check idea, so that they can check their stock cupboards as they're ordering. They can add it into their basket, but then they can check their basket again at the end and alter that in terms of whether they need stuff for particular meals. So it becomes really and this is particularly from the online mainstream consumer, is that they use the platform as a way to meal plan live, I guess. So there is no need for the shopping list. It's sort of a live shopping list, and one that can be altered in reference to which meals that they want to have when they start to look at their basket at the end. So from the online consumer, that I suppose, and it speaks to what Niamh was saying, it is this big shop. It's for the week. Now it's likely they shop elsewhere, and they've mentioned that. For the more neighbour food consumer or alternative food network, they tend to focus more so on seeking out the seasonal and local, and having more of a preference for the sustainable aspect, or the sustainability of the product attribute, rather than it affecting.
Okay, thank you, Claire. I'm very conscious of time. We have 3 minutes left, and there's a lot of questions after presenting here. And so I'm going to open it up to the panel as a whole at this point in time. And I suppose the first question that a lot of people have liked is posed by Breach. And I'd just like to ask the three panelists very briefly, does online browsing and shopping change the composition of the shopping trolley versus the in-store shop? Are, for example, less sugar, more healthy, more sustainable choices? So Niamh, I think this was initially posed to you, but Claire has your hand up to give an answer, so we'll go to Claire first.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, so I guess what we have found just from our research is that the online, and this particular, I suppose, is online mainstream, that people tend to not impulse buy. They reorder, they look at their usuals, they even reorder the same order again, and it just becomes very routinized, and they tend to, they're suggesting links, I suppose, to healthy eating, so that they're not, one person said, I'm not going to scroll through loads of biscuits online, I'm just not going to go into that category or subcategory if I want to be healthy. So it sort of facilitates healthy eating.
Niamh, do you want to add to that comment? I noticed that you're actually
Yeah, no, I'd echo what Claire said, and very much what she was speaking about. It's control. It allows people to make decisions while they're, not stressed and running with a trolley through the supermarket. And what we see as well, it allows people much more control over the budget, so spend, and that decision to consciously just buy or not. So whether it is more healthy, we haven't looked at that. It's an interesting one, but definitely it is more, I would say, considered. Their shopping is far more considered online.
Okay, thank you, Niamh. I'll go then to another question. John B asked you directly, Niamh, are there any online data from Musgraves that demonstrates the sustainability impact, especially considering Musgraves' recognition on advancing SDGs in Ireland?
That's a mouthful. Do we have any KPIs to date? I am not 100% sure, but I know that we have set out really specific KPIs between now and 2025, and that includes a 15% reduction on our carbon reduction, for instance. It's looking at stores and how they reduce their respective carbon footprint, and as I said, there's a commitment there to remove all packaging. So there are specific KPIs set out. I'm assuming we would be measuring those day to day, and I know there's a specific team that looks after that. So it's probably just my ignorance in this case. I'm pretty sure that would be the case.
Okay, thank you, Niamh. Now another one for you, seeing as was two with thumbs up on this one. Have you any feedback on the surprise and delight product testing add to basket Is it available from all your stores?
It's absolutely massively popular, and Irish people love getting something, a little treat for free. It's something that we tend to, I suppose, welcome new shoppers at a certain time of year. But I suppose when you think about how the last couple of months have gone, there's so much more potential in that area as well, and that's something we're looking at, definitely.
And then we have a question here. How does the business model work for producers? I think that might be for you, Jack.
Well, how does the neighbor food model work for producers? They join up and they create an account with us in a similar fashion to the way you create an account on a social media or anything like that. We verify them with our payment provider, and then they have the opportunity to add their products with photographs, descriptions, making sure they're ticking all of the relevant categories, organic, vegetarian, whatnot. And then they add specific prices to their products and then join to the different suppliers, to the different locations.
Now, I had another question for you, Jack. I can see how neighbour food would work well within urban areas, but how are the challenges being addressed in more rural areas, small towns, where both producers and consumers have to travel further to drop off and pick up?
Well, I love this question, and I'm really glad it's been asked. We don't have a huge success in urban areas. The biggest success of neighbour food is in rural areas. And that's speaking from a customer engagement point of view, but more so it's speaking from the fact that in urban areas, there are not that many food producers. So the producers having to drop off to the collection points, driving into the centre of Dublin, is not as practical as it is coming in a rural area. And neighbour food was designed as an alternative for producers than having to do another farmer's market. So a farmer's market takes up your full day, you have to staff it, you have to bring more than you're going to sell, it's no guarantees, it's weather dependent. Neighbour food was designed as another supply point, but another benefit of neighbour food is that we don't have the same break even that a farmer's market does. So a farmer's market needs to have a huge number of customers and enough producers to be sustainable. And neighbour food can work on a much, much smaller break even, meaning that we can bring a farmer's market model to much, much smaller communities. So we've had successes in places. I'll give one example, but Carrigeen, which is a market that opened during the lockdown and still sustains to this day with producers happy with the income and with the host happy with their commission. And Carrigeen is not even really a village, it's a crossroads that is down in the south of Kilkenny on the border with Waterford. And if you look at it on Google Maps, you'd struggle to find 30 houses within 5 kilometers of it, and yet there's 35 to 40 customers there every week. So it actually works and engages better. And from our point of view as a business, there's far more rural areas in Ireland than there are urban ones. So to take our focus away from somewhere like Dublin and focus more in the Midlands, focus more along the West Coast, we're having much better traction and success and much better buy-in from customers. And there's less noise in the airwaves when you're promoting as well. You can promote in rural Ireland much more directly. If you're going up against everything else in an urban area, it's hard to get the point across. Whereas in rural Ireland, we're bringing something that is convenient and special to the area, and the local people there buy into it more as a community effort than so much as a shopping experience.
Okay, thank you. Now, I think back to you, Niamh, for the next question here. Have you considered adding a fill service for items like shampoo, cleaning products, laundry, soap? So this is from Maureen.
Yeah, I think we've seen that in shopper feedback, that there is a desire for this. I suppose the logistics of then rolling it out nationwide is tricky, but I would say watch this space.
Okay, that's very interesting. We will look forward to that. It's been exciting because I suppose that deals with a lot of the packaging related issues for us. Yes. Claire, we have a question or two for you from Breed. What is your view? What, in your view, is the barrier to highlighting, speaking about food waste more? As you mentioned, that we don't really speak much to it.
Yeah, thank you, Breed. For that question, I think it's a difficult one, and I think it's one that maybe, you see, when we look in the households, food waste is probably the most important thing that consumers are battling with. And that can be from, so food waste, but also packaging waste and packaging causing food. So I suppose we've had a couple of, points here about packaging and sustainable packaging, but also what's happening is because things are coming in packed, you know, so like a bag of kale, there's too much kale for the need, and therefore just the fact that it's in a package causes food waste. So I think there's, you know, just beyond, I suppose, packaging, there's other issues there that link to the food waste. Barrier to highlighting or speaking about it, I think perhaps it's one of the things that maybe retailers could speak more to, and I suppose in recognizing that food waste is something that where there's food waste within supply chains, there's also food waste in the household. I think 1/3 of all food that's in a household is wasted, and that has a monetary value as well. So I guess, you know, opening up the conversation about it, and it's not to say that, you know, I think, you know, where retailers can perhaps help in terms of packaging and talking about it more. There's also, I guess, I'm not always, you know, too keen about talking about too much in terms of individual responsibility, but when things come into our own homes, you know, there are, you know, for the most part, widespread brown bin collections now, and I suppose it is what we do with our waste and how much we order, and yeah, so I think maybe just opening up the conversation about it.
And just a related question from Bridget, what was the most common sustainable practice you observed in the household in the eating, storage and disposal across the 40 households?
Yeah, I think that would definitely be in terms of preservation. So preservation is something that's really key, a key sustainable practice. And like consumers, where I mentioned the freezer already, that's one, I suppose, more basic thing that people do, but we've seen very advanced, you know, people engaging in pickling and drying and really engaging in preservation practices that allow them to keep local and seasonal produce long term over the winter, that, you know, otherwise they wouldn't have access to. So I think preservation is certainly one of the key things.
Okay, and the final question here, Jim Corbett asked, which is a very interesting question because I was thinking myself of asking the first half of it, and this is for all three of you. How far will consumers revert to previous buying practices post COVID-19? Will we see the development of so-called dark stores? So, Niamh, we might start with you. What do you think is the likelihood of people staying? Or have we lost Niamh? Oh, we've lost Niamh. Claire, we might ask you first, and then we'd ask Jack in the context of his particular business.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. So I guess from, you know, our research was pre-COVID, so we were looking at consumers who were already engaging in online in the winter of 2019. So, you know, where there was a surge in people, you know, going online, I think there are benefits that we've uncovered pre-COVID, I suppose, and it's not marred by why consumers engaged in online because of COVID. And I suppose it's about trying to look at those and how we might promote those reasons.
Niamh, you might answer the same question. How far will consumers revert to previous buying practices?
I caught the end of it, but my screen went a little still, so I was like, oh, what was that? I think I do genuinely believe COVID has changed some of our behaviours for good. We have seen, I suppose, people adopting online and sticking with it. A lot of that is around, I suppose, concerns about going in store particularly. But I do believe we're after converting quite a few people over, and that trust element and just getting used to the service. It's all about routine. So I think in many ways some behaviours will have changed permanently, but I think actually, and I hate to say it, but getting out shopping as well at the moment is almost one of the few pleasures we have. So there's that element as well. And there is something nice about, you know, browsing food, you know, in store. We'll always struggle to recreate the experience of picking up a piece of fruit and seeing, do you want this exact one? But what we do is just try and emphasize that our in-store pickers are picking with you in mind and trying to give you a good shop. So it's a balance. I think some things have changed permanently, others will start to drift back in time.
And Jack, the final word on that from a neighbour food perspective.
Well, I do agree that of course people are going to go back to things they enjoyed before as soon as they have the opportunity to do them, and they'll probably relish in them, and there'll be a huge surge towards live music and events and the arts. And but at the end of the day, this period of time is allowing online or alternative services to evolve with customers' needs and develop new patterns that I do think people are realizing, perhaps for the first time, that they are beneficial to their life. They're giving them more free time for other things, or they're giving them access to better quality, better value, better lifestyle choices. I do think that the onus is now on, for speaking from Neighbour Food's point of view, the onus is now on us to look to customers to see what more is required in this new way in which we do things, because Neighbour Food wasn't built for a pandemic. And although we've been able to pivot very quickly because we were small enough and a software able to do that, I do think now is the time that we need to maybe always sit back and reevaluate and say, what can we do more to make it a better thing? But to answer the question properly, I don't really see there being a swing back in a lot of habits that people are building up during COVID.
I suppose in many respects what we're seeing is the unlocking of the opportunity, and one of the silver linings of COVID-19, and believe you me, there are very few from what I can see, is the fact that this opportunity has accelerated and is now leveraging that for the benefit of sustainability within our society. That would be fantastic. I'm conscious that we're now over time by 12 minutes or 10 minutes, so I'd like to close up by thanking all our speakers first and foremost for the time they gave and the preparation to give us a flavour for issues around online food retailing and also how that links to sustainability. We would hope to have another session maybe in 6 months' time that would be more focused and that would give detailed insights into other findings that are coming from the work. I would also like to thank our backroom production team, Aoife and Christopher, who allowed that smooth movement between us and seamless, and the planning that went into that over the last number of weeks. Again, I'd like to thank all of you. If you want further information, you can get that. You see my email and contact details were put up on the holding slide. Equally, I suppose the slides will be available and the video will be available following this event. And again, I would like finally to thank all of you and our funding body, the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine Firm Initiative, as part of the EARNet SUSFood to pay for our project, Horizon 2020 projects. So I hope you have a great week, and I hope that you found some of the information here valuable. And again, have a great week. Thanks all.